Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting of the new year, and we have many more ahead of us. Tonight, as you know, we're coming together to discuss matters for discussion really for the charter, and whether we're going to be discussing whether items should be modified, included, or deleted from the charter as a part of our work. I'll get into some of the framework and talk about that a little bit more as we continue our meeting. But as you know, our first order of business tonight, we do have a public hearing, and I know we do have a couple individuals signed up for comments this evening. So what I thought we would do is we could hear from our public members first, and then we could get into more detail in terms of the charter specifically. What is the charter form of government? Kind of talk about how we'll move forward with our meeting tonight, identifying all of the issues that we will be considering over the next several months, and kind of plotting those into our work plan. So tonight, in addition to the public hearing, we're going to hear from Ms. Lori Blair-Klassmeyer. She's going to provide some more legal advice to us, and also walk through the resolution and things more specific for our consideration. And then we're also going to hear from Matt Power, the County Executive's Chief Administrative Officer, and Pete Barron, who's the County Executive's Legislative Officer, about items that the administration would like us to consider as a part of our work. So with that, maybe first, I guess we do have minutes to approve from our last meeting. I almost forgot. I know Laura sent those around to everyone. I guess, does anyone have any comments or changes to the minutes? Okay, I see everyone's heads, they're shaking no. All right, then could I get a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved.
All right, Tori, can I get a second?
Second.
All right, that was David, Mr. Kaufman. Okay, thank you. All in favor? And say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. All right, so our minutes are approved. Okay, then why don't we can just jump into the public hearing. And Ms. Corby, so we do have two individuals who have signed up to testify. Okay, and we'd like to ask our individual, we will be limiting testimony to 2 minutes apiece for that. So Ms. Corby, do you want to call on our first? And Mr. Svensson, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us again tonight.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Okay. Okay, Kurt Svensson, Arnold, Maryland. Given the 2-minute limit for public testimony, I'm going to use my time to summarize the series of 3 one-pagers I submitted last night to the Charter Revision Commission for tonight's hearing. So first, the 4 process-oriented thoughts that I encourage you to keep in mind include: 1, consider what is meant by the final sentence in section 1203 of the county charter. That is, that the revision commission shall receive from the county an appropriation sufficient to carry out its duties and responsibilities. I think that ought to be used so that you can get some more support and insights than just what staff can give you. 2, consider initiating the creation of a redistricting manual similar to that done by Baltimore County. That was an initiative of their revision commission. 3, be suspicious of and critically review all proposed amendments. Please remember that this is government and not a private business. 4, consider the allowed frequency of charter amendments and the level of support required for approval. Amendments to the charter, the county's constitution, should never be rushed, nor subject to only a simple majority of votes cast. Second, as a commission, you've already expressed a desire to improve the nature of council representation. Despite the setbacks of a compressed time frame and the practical challenges associated with equitably drawing district lines, I urge you to use a significant portion of the remainder of your time to truly study the representation concept, including the elements itemized in my one-pager. Third, my proposal for a dual district representation system for the Anne Arundel County Council is a concept plan, building on my testimony to you on the 13th of December and more detailed and ever-evolving follow-up document a few days later. I urge you to explore the possibilities of something like that. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Mr. Svensson. Yes, we will definitely, I know we have all of your handouts and things, and we'll definitely read through those, consider those as part of our discussions. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Corby, who do we have next?
Next, we have Ms. Viamonte going to. Ms. Viamonte, you just need to unmute, just give us your name and address for the record.
Yes, my name is Gail Viamonte, and my address is 2800 Joseph Court in Crofton, Maryland. Good evening, Chairwoman Mansfield and members of the Charter Revision Commission. I'm Gail Viamonte, representing the League of Women Voters of Anne Arundel County, and I'm the League's Vice President. First, I'd like to thank all of you for accepting the responsibility of reviewing and considering amendments to the Anne Arundel Charter. As you saw in the foreword to the Green Book, or the first published charter in 1964, the League of Women Voters was credited with valuable suggestions in formulating the very first charter for Anne Arundel County. In reviewing the charter in the years since, the League came to the position that the charter should be clear, concise, and confined to fundamentals. We advise you to keep that position in mind as you consider the many requests for additions and modifications that will be made to you. There is a tendency to ask that the charter take care of many issues that are better dealt with by ordinances adopted by the City Council. We trust that you will avoid overspecification. And again, thank you for your work on behalf of all of us.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Viamonte. I guess I will have to say I completely agree with you, and I think that's something that we definitely need to keep in mind as we do our work, and kind of sort through what should be in the charter, what should not be in the charter, and what can be handled through other policy discussions and local legislation or through other means. So thank you for raising that point. Okay, so Ms. Corby, has anyone else come forth, or we?
Madam Chair, there's no one else that is registered to actually speak. I did enable the raised hand feature, so if anybody is in the attendee room and they want to raise their hand, if they did not speak and they would like to, we can do that. Otherwise, I think that's it for public testimony this evening.
Okay.
I don't see any hands being raised. I do want to note for the record that there was a couple pieces submitted through the online testimony tool, 3 or 4 pieces that we received. We also received 3 hand-typed pieces from a member of the public in our Dropbox outside the Arundel Center. That has all been shared with you. It's in that folder, and I will get a summary of it all posted on the website tomorrow morning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Corby. Appreciate that. Okay, then I guess we will close out the public hearing part of our meeting and kind of get into the charter matters discussion we have next. And just for a few comments before we really kind of dig into that, I just kind of wanted to reiterate that what we're here to do is discuss the charter and whether items need to be modified, included, or deleted from the charter that provides the framework for county operations. I think we're not here to debate policy issues and matters, because these things really are separate and apart from the charter, kind of the same point that the individual from the League of Women Voters was making for our discussions. But I really do think it's important to keep that in mind so we don't get kind of bogged down in issues that really are not a part of our scope. So I think we really need to be cognizant of that. Just a little bit, I know we are going to hear from Ms. Lori Blair Klassmeyer next before we hear from Mr. Barron and Mr. Power, but just in terms of the charter form of government, I mean, essentially, it's a form of government that usually means the executive and legislative branches are separate branches. A charter county possesses a unique set of laws that forms the legal foundation of its local system of government, and the actual legal document that articulates these laws is called a charter. It's sort of like a constitution, so it lays out the powers and functions of elected officials, as well as the organization and procedures of the local government. And I know Ms. Corby has included in our Google folder, it's actually a document from the Maryland Association of Counties, which is kind of funny because I actually worked on that document when I worked there many years ago. But anyway, it's a great document, and it kind of lays out the difference between what a charter county is versus a commission county, a home rule county, and kind of what what the authority is in each of those situations and what they can and cannot do. So it's an awesome document, I would say. But anyway, also a state law defines that a charter county can do, the county has express powers. And Lori will get into more of that detail when she gets into her piece of this. So I guess what I would like us to do, we're going to talk a little bit about the scope, which Lori is going to get into. And then as we go forward tonight, what I'm hoping, I know we have the resolution from the county council. We are going to hear from the administration, and then our last agenda item tonight will be to discuss what items members of the commission would also like to have on the list of things for us to consider. And then what I'd like to do from there is working with Ms. Corby, we'll slot those topics into our schedule and our framework for work based on what article we're going to be taking up at which point in time, and that will kind of help frame those discussions. And my thought is when we have those discussions, for those meetings, we will be focusing on those specific items that we have identified for discussion, or that have been identified for us. And that we would just only talk about those issues at that point in time. We are going to have members of the administration coming in to talk with us as those items relate to various departments or what their functions are. I will ask that everyone be very respectful of them. Obviously, they work hard. They do a lot of great things for the residents of Anne Arundel County. So I'm going to ask that you please be respectful during those conversations. But with that, actually, I guess Ms. Lara Klassmeyer, maybe I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the resolution and kind of our role with reviewing that.
Sure. Monday evening. So we talked a little bit the last time about kind of broadly how the charter is organized, and I touched on a couple of these things. So I think what we're going to do tonight is kind of go through this list of 16 items and kind of talk about the ones that are specifically mentioned in the charter, ones that aren't mentioned, it could be, and things that just aren't really part of the charter conversation. So if you look at Resolution 5421, which is the resolution that came from the County Council, asking you to put items on your agenda, I'll run through these very quickly, and we can discuss them. Obviously, as we go through these, we'll be doing individual ones of these more in detail, and even talking about kind of language you may want to consider to deal with the ones that are actually charter revisions. As you can see in the whereas paragraph, excuse me, the purpose of the Charter Commission is to make a comprehensive study of county government and updating the charter. The definition of the county government really is in the charter. The definition and organization of the county government is there. And I think that's really what that phrase, which is a quotation from the charter itself, is referring to. So with that said, the first item on the list is examine the benefits of increasing the number of councilmanic districts. The number of councilmanic districts is established through sections 201 and 206 of the charter. There are 7, as you know, from all of your redistricting work. Charter revision would be required to increase the number of councilmanic districts, or to even add at-large members. The membership is limited to 1 person from each councilmanic district. So that is a charter issue. The second one is allowing members of the county council to serve in office for 3 full consecutive 4-year terms. Currently, that is governed by Section 203. Currently, they are limited to 2 full consecutive 4-year terms. I will say that in the past, we have had members that have filled the remainder of a term and then can fill 2 full consecutive terms. So if you come in the first or second year of a term, you can end up completing that term and doing 2 additional terms. Mr. Snow has his hand up. Sorry.
Yes, I do. I had a question of clarification from number 1.
Sure.
So in the legislation, it says review the number of districts. Is there a distinction between district and members? Like, would that be an important clarification to make as far as our recommendation?
Sure. So the number of districts, increasing the number of districts would increase the number of members because you'd have a member from each of the new districts. But another kind of related issue is whether you would have at-large members. So you would have members that are elected generally by the entire county population and would not serve in a particular councilmanic district. So you could maintain 7 districts and have a charter revision that allowed for 2, 3, 4, whatever at-large members who would be elected by the total electorate.
But the just so I'm understanding, the language as presented in the legislation does specifically say districts, not necessarily at large. So we would be adding in a discussion about at-large members. Am I understanding that correct?
That's correct. It says
Okay.
examine the benefits of increasing the number of districts.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm. Are there any other questions about the term? So the 2 full terms plus any remainder of another term if you're appointed to a remainder of another term is the current. So what this allowing members to serve for 3 full terms would be, they could, if you are appointed to fulfill the remainder of a term for a member that leaves for some reason, then you would get that plus 3 full terms. And I see Mr. Telford's hand.
Larry Telford, Ms. Klausmeyer, the way the law currently works is it's just a consecutive term limit, correct?
Correct.
For example, if someone served 2 terms left for any period of time, they could come back to serve another 2 in a row if the voters decided so. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
The third one is to evaluate salaries and retirement benefits for members of the county council. Sections 204 does talk about compensation. That number that is in there is not accurate because that has been changed by legislation since then, as permitted by the charter. In addition, there is a Salary Standards Commission, which finished its work up for the holidays, I guess it was, and they submitted their report before the holidays. So as far as actually setting the compensation, that is done through the process with the Salary Standards Commission. So this, evaluating the salaries and benefits is really not a function of this commission. It's already been done by the Salary Standards Commission as required under the charter. So, I'm not seeing any hands. Of course, I'm not seeing everybody right now. I don't know. Oh, okay, Mr. Snow.
Mr. Snow.
Sorry, yeah, I was debating on whether I was going to ask the question or not, but just to make sure I'm clearly understanding the terms here, because we're not necessarily being asked to consider specific salaries or benefits. Is it safe to say that the Salary Standards Commission would be the ones to evaluate the full-time versus part-time, or would that fall into the scope of our conversation on the charter?
Yeah, that's the one coming up, right? The full-time versus part-time is not specified in the charter. I think in the Green Book, there is a discussion of that indicating that it's the compensation amount that was originally set was based on the notion that it is a part-time job. I'm sure council members would disagree with you on this certain times, but so that's not really in the charter. I think that plays into the evaluation of the salaries and benefits is, to what extent that job is part-time versus full-time, and how many hours go into it. I think that is part of what the Salary Standards Commission looks at. And like I said, there is currently no charter section that specifically addresses that.
So is it fair to say that this is kind of out of scope for our effort?
I would think so. Yes, because the only reason you would care whether it's full-time or part-time has to do with compensation, I think, and that is a Salary Standards Commission issue. So we have discussed that one. Unless anybody else has another question about that. Evaluate if members of the county council were full-time, whether they should be allowed to maintain secondary employment. So again, there's nothing in right now. There's nothing in the charter that deals with that secondary employment issue. Like I said, this is the Charter Review Commission the Charter Commission back in when they were creating the charter recognized that this was not a full-time position. Really, the notion of secondary employment is probably a county ethics issue. We have a public ethics law. It's Article 7 of the county code. So again, I think to the extent that that's tied in with the notion of whether council members should be full or part-time, I think that's all ties back to salary standards. And here it pulls in the public ethics law, which all county council members are currently subject to, and all county employees are subject to. So, any questions on that? So now we're moving into some, I'm sorry, okay, those were in order. The other ones I've got out of order. Evaluate allowing the county council to increase or amend items in the budget. And that's in Article 7 of the Charter, Section 709. And right now we have this what was called the executive budget system, where the county executive proposes the budget. The county council considers the budget and can cut items from the budget, but cannot add, or can cut dollars from the budget, but cannot add dollars to the budget, with two very small exceptions. One is the Board of Education. If the Board of Education submits a budget to the county executive and the county executive makes cuts to that budget and then presents it to the county council can restore what the county executive cut from the Board of Ed's requested budget. And the other exception is that results of the arbitration with the collective bargaining units in the county have to be funded. So those are the basically two small exceptions to that rule. There would be nothing that would legally prevent a charter revision to allow the county council to add dollars to the budget. And if you read through Article 7, probably some night when you can't sleep because parts of it are a little boring, but you kind of see the interrelationship between the current expense budget in particular and the property tax rate. So there has to be a balancing, and the property tax rate is ultimately set based on the appropriations through the current expense budget, and whatever general revenue is supporting the capital budget. So if the county council is permitted to increase items in the budget and the total dollar amount of the budget ends up being increased, then the property tax would also be increased. And we do have here in here in Anne Arundel County, sometimes referred to a tax cap, but it's really not a tax cap, it's a revenue cap. So that revenue from one year to the next cannot increase more than what increases through increases in assessment of the tax. So there's a bunch of different things that are at play there, and several sections that would probably have to be touched to result in allowing the council to be able to increase the budget. If that makes sense. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, Mr. Telford.
Larry Telford again. Ms. Klassmeyer, isn't it true that the state passed some kind of provision where the county doesn't have to abide by the property tax cap? Or am I misunderstanding that?
No.
Well, I think there is a provision, but it's specifically tied to education. And I think there was broad legislation that will allow counties to exceed their tax caps for things if they have one, or increase their, no, is that tied to the income? No, I know there's a provision that allows the jurisdictions to increase their rates specifically for funding education.
And I think, and it's tied into the MO, the maintenance of effort. I did that research. It's, slipped out of my head, but that's the only we can exceed the revenue cap. And it is, you're right, it's tied to education.
But it is also true, legislation did pass, and on the ballot, I guess it was 2 years ago now, at the state level, because the governor's budgetary authority, well, I would say the county executive's authority more like mirrors the governor's authority in this circumstances. And actually, that referendum that actually passed 2 years ago. So now the General Assembly, and it's within whatever overall dollar amount that's been set by the governor, but now the General Assembly has the ability to actually increase funding. Now they can just cut, just like the council, but they'll be able to increase and actually move funds around within the budget.
Starting in at fiscal 20. So that'll be one more fiscal year after this budget. Yep. Yeah. That's true. That passed that was actually a amendment to the Constitution that passed in 20. It's like, so.
Yes. Yeah.
So there was a gap in between the time when it passed and the time when it's going to actually be able to be done. And that's something that can also be considered if, when the effective date of these amendments are. So. The next one is evaluate allowing the county council to introduce bond initiatives to be placed on the ballot. I'm not entirely sure what this one means, quite frankly, so I do apologize. However, the bond sale every year is based on its charter section 721 is based on what needs to be funded through bonds through the capital budget. There is, and that's at 721 of the budget, there is a limit on borrowing limitation in 719 of the budget, which is 10% of the assessable base of the county for bonds and other indebtedness. And there's things that are considered indebtedness that don't always, things like lease obligations and such are also considered indebtedness. There's a lot of factors that go into that other than just the bond borrowing. But so so I guess my point is I'm not quite sure what bond initiatives the council would want to do independent of the county executive. I mean, if you've ever looked at the capital budget, all of the projects have funding sources, bonds, grants, general fund. And so I'm not really sure what a bond initiative the council independent of that would put forward. And then again, there's this balancing act with what you can actually, where the debt limit is. So maybe we can get more clarification from the council on exactly what that means and talk about it further in the future.
Yes. So this I think what it's getting to, like at the state level within the capital budget, sometimes there is so much money, it might be $15 million or something, that a lot of times it also sets up a lot of contention between the General Assembly and the governor, because the governor has not been setting aside those funds for bond initiatives for members of the General Assembly to fund, certain projects in their districts that they might be interested in funding. And, usually the General Assembly can, like, they still have the confines of whatever, like the capital debt affordability specifies, but generally they try to do their best to identify some money that they can kind of like earmark to be used for bond initiatives. So I think what this getting at is something very similar to where a council member, if there's a park or, I don't know, a nonprofit, it wants to build a new playground or whatever, they can actually identify funds and use it for those purposes. I think is where they're.
Yeah, and that's a place where we're a little different. So yeah, because the bond initiative will go to the local government to then expend on the project. And that's not really how we're set up. I mean, we got one entity. So if they want to park District 3, then that needs to appear in the county's capital budget and be funded through whatever, mechanism is then chosen to fund it. So, yeah, I mean, I get that. And this happens all the time where, we're just not structured that way. So some of these things have a good parallel between the state and the county. So,
yeah.
Yeah, and it makes sense. If you look at the next one is, allowing councilmatic districts to be eligible for grants under the community benefit program. And this is a matter that has been discussed in the past with some council members. And the notion being that they can somehow direct money to that, some pot of money that can somehow then be directed by the council members for nonprofits doing projects in their districts. And that is probably something that could be somehow inserted into the budget system through through a charter amendment. Because right now, the county executive is the only one who has the authority to direct grants to where they go. So, that's something that could be explored, I'll say. And that kind of, so if you read that one and you read the one, if you read those two together, that may be kind of where they're headed. Yeah.
And both would need to be a charter amendment, just for clarification. Right.
Yes. Anything really is going to do something to allow the budgetary process to change. Yes.
And Mr. Kaufman, I'm sorry, I see your hand is up.
Yep. No, when you're seeking clarification from the council, I was totally reading it the way that Ms. Mansfield was describing it, is that effectively they're asking us to consider whether or not there's value or merit to having a fiduciary function within their responsibilities to do, and I hate to say end around because it makes it sound like it's a strategic, but effectively to not have to do every initiative through the executive branch. I would imagine in settings where there's one party in control of the executive branch and another party in control of the legislative branch, they're looking to be able to maneuver and position to be able to handle some of the budgetary responsibilities. If you can just, when you're seeking clarification, whether that's you or Laura or whoever, to just determine if that's conceptually what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yep.
And Lori and commission members, I can circle back with the council. I can tell you that those 3 items are definitely connected to sort of looking for more of an ability to do projects in the county, whether it's increasing, whether it's being able to set up bonds or grants, one way or another. And I can point you to Prince George's County, who I know is structured in a very different way compared to this county. However, last year they did some bond initiatives that went on the ballot, and it was asking members of the public to approve it. And they were certain things like, libraries, parks, things that had that public benefit. I think this is all going back to one idea, which is how can the council be more involved and have more power to fund some of these kinds of public projects.
Okay.
But I will get clarification.
Okay. That might help, because ultimately, if there's if this commission feels that it's something they want to support, somebody like me has to figure out how to write. So that would be helpful if we knew exactly what they were looking for. Yeah. So the next one is placing a limit on the local income tax rate in Maryland, in Anne Arundel County. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if this one is a charter or a state law provision. I know that the last meeting I got a question about various tax rates and information, and I did send some information back on that. So, I mean, right now there is nothing in the charter that relates to the income tax rate. It's a matter, I believe it's a matter of state law. So it sets it for all the different counties. And however, I could see a situation in which there would be a charter amendment saying that it can't exceed a certain amount. So I'm not going to say that this one's not on the charter list, but there's nothing currently in the charter that relates to the income tax rate. So now I can do it to my next page here. Examine the powers of the fire chief to oversee and regulate writing members of volunteer fire companies in Anne Arundel County. So this one is not in the charter specifically. Obviously, the Office of Fire Chief is discussed in Section 545, and the powers and duties is discussed in Section 547. Every volunteer fire company in Anne Arundel County has a reciprocity agreement with the county that discusses staffing at each station. The staffing levels are set. The staffing divisions between volunteers and career firefighters are set in those agreements. The notion of who's in charge at a fire scene, depending on who's there, is set in the reciprocity agreements. So I'm not really sure. This is not something that's in the charter. It is something that's contractual. And I'm not really sure that this is a charter issue, rises to the level of a charter issue. I think there was another fire one. Oh, yeah, the next one is evaluate Section 547. That's the powers and duties one that I discussed as it applies to volunteer fire companies and any entities under which they operate. I think that's really just the same issue. Because 547 has the general duties. At the onset, I'm not sorry for the word, inception, that's the word I wanted of charter government, there was no career fire service at that point. The first class of the career fire service started in 1968. So, and the career fire service has continued to grow. And the volunteer service, I believe, has shrunk somewhat. So I'm not really sure this is where to go with this as far as the charter. Maybe it's a statute issue, maybe it's a code issue, but it certainly is something that right now is controlled by contract. So, and then number 12 is a local fire tax for funding the fire department. And this is one I need to do a little more research on. At the inception of charter government, probably prior to the inception of charter government, there were road taxes, there were fire taxes, there were different types of taxes. And, part of consolidating government through a charter and taking this form of government was eliminating many of those taxes, and the road districts became something else. And so I'll do a little research on this. I do believe there are counties that have it, and I can certainly get some more information. I'll make a note to get some more information on that for the next meeting. So, number 13, examine allowing the use of an emergency ordinance to address a situation that requires immediate action. So, and then this really goes with number 14, which is evaluate sections 208 and 307 as they apply to emergency ordinances and what could be done to improve the procedure for passing emergency ordinances. So we have this little quirk in the charter that 208D is the provision that relates to acute emergencies and emergency legislation to deal with acute emergencies. And we have a separate section, 307I, which deals with things that are kind of an emergency, but they aren't acute emergencies. And basically the difference is that the acute emergency allows for an emergency hearing. It makes things effective immediately. And the 307I is basically that a bill goes through the normal legislative process, except the only difference being that because it's a not acute emergency, but an emergency, it's effective immediately upon signature of the county executive. So you don't have to wait the 40, all other legislation has a 45-day waiting period based on the referendum. The 45 days after a bill becomes effective, the public can file a referendum related to that legislation. So that's where the 45 days comes from. So this is, it is an issue that arises from time to time. We just had some emergency ordinances related to masks, and we had a special hearing scheduled within a certain number of days to deal with those emergencies. Both types of emergency bill require supermajority of 5 to pass. So I guess the question here is whether we still need both of these types of emergency ordinance and how to kind of put them together and coordinate them and probably do a better job of explaining the difference between the two. And I see Mr. Telford's hand.
Thank you, Larry Telford, Ms. Classmeyer. Who determines if an emergency is a 208 or a 307 right now?
Usually the sponsor will present it that way. And then there is an evaluation done through staffing, law office and staff to determine if it is an acute emergency that can't wait till the next, for a bill to go through the process and be a non-acute emergency bill. The history of I'll tell you historically how this has worked. A lot of bills in the past, for example, supplementary appropriation bills. So a supplementary appropriation may be able to wait through the advertising process and the public hearing process, which, for example, if a bill is introduced on the first Monday of the month, it goes through the advertising process and it's usually heard on the first Monday of the following month. So you have a bill sitting approximately a month before it gets heard. The emergency process, none of that happens. It happens much quicker. It can even be advertised after the public hearing or passage. So, the supplementary appropriations may have been able to be okay to sit for that month. But then once they're passed, if they're passed at that first meeting after 30 days or so, then they would have to wait another 45 days. And so a lot of these became the 307I emergency because the money needed to be expended. That's why it's being supplementary appropriated, because it needs to be expended. So that extra 45 days just doesn't work. We need to spend this money. So there was a lot of discussion about whether, amongst many people, about whether that was truly an emergency, even a non-acute emergency. And the result of that was a charter amendment that allowed budget bills to be effective upon signature of the county executive. So nobody has to make that decision anymore, whether those are truly emergencies. And we get our effective date so that the funds that are being supplementally appropriated can be expended. Since that charter amendment, we see much fewer bills as coming through as the 307I emergencies. I'd have to go back and look and see what other kinds of bills recently we've done that way. It doesn't happen let's just say it doesn't happen very often. Occasionally we will get an emergency budget bill because the one thing you can do with an emergency bill is you can amend it and hear it the same night and vote on it the same night. And so sometimes with a budget bill, if we're really running up against the clock and we think that there might be an issue with an amendment, we will make it an emergency, a 307I emergency. But for the most part, we don't do that a whole lot we don't have a whole lot of those bills anymore. I can certainly go back and look, or Laura and I can go back and look and see what other things have come through as 307I emergencies recently.
So if I'm hearing you right, it seems like a lot of the 307s are really just spending money as a matter of government going on day to day.
That's traditionally what it has been. As like I say, a lot of that has been eliminated by this other charter amendment that allows us to not have to do that. But other than that, I don't know, maybe Laura has some better examples than I do. Sitting here, my brain's not coming up with any recent ones.
I'm trying to think hard. I think that that Laura, I think that initially there are the two kinds of emergencies. One is the acute actual emergency. That's the Section 208 emergency. And then Section 307 is a declared emergency, right? But those are the two different kinds of emergencies. The declared emergencies that Section 307 talks about were typically used for budget bills. And a few years ago, someone said, like, why do we have to make this an emergency? Because when you use the word emergency, it sends certain messages like, emergency, the house is on fire. When the house is not on fire and all they need to do is need to spend money immediately. So someone brilliantly came up with the idea of correcting that by allowing the budget bills to go into effect immediately instead of waiting the 45 days. So it took away the need for that declared emergency to be used every quarter, every time some kind of transfer was needed. And then if you do read through that super fun green book that Ms. Blair Klassmeyer has mentioned, and it is actually cool if you like history. It talks about why the charter board did Section 208 and Section 307 the way they did. They actually modeled it after two provisions in the state constitution at the time. And one was that acute actual emergency that was like, the house is on fire. In other words, there would be facts to support that kind of emergency. The second one was the 307 emergency, which was a little less urgent, and it was just declared. You didn't need facts to support it. The council declared it by 5 votes, basically. So those were differences there. That I think that one provision in the state constitution is now gone. I think only one is currently in existence. So it's hard to see the parallel today if you look at this charter versus the state constitution. It would require a little digging in history to find that original provision. And then the other thing about both kinds of emergencies is that the bills that are made emergencies can be amended and voted on the very same meeting. So there's no need to wait. Typically, if we amend a bill, it has to go back out, come back. With emergency bills, no matter what, they can be amended and voted on the same night. And then finally, that Section 208 emergency, and Laura, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but that type of emergency, that acute actual emergency that is supported by something actually happening in the world, is eligible for the emergency legislative session. Whereas the other kind of emergency, which is just declared, is only eligible to be heard and voted on at a regular legislative session, which would be the first or third Monday of the month, or any day in the month of May.
That's correct.
That's a lot, but I live and breathe this stuff these days, so it kind of rolls off.
Right. Well, and let me just say too, I mean, I was telling you how we don't use 307I a whole lot. Prior to COVID, you didn't see a lot of 208Ds either. I mean, a situation maybe if there's a hurricane, or I think when we had the 50 inches, the 2 snowstorms that gave us 50 inches of snow, in 3 days or whatever, 10 or 12 years ago, you don't see a lot of those either, quite frankly. And usually the ones that would be 208Ds would be the kind of things where they're a declared emergency by the county executive or the state or the federal government. So like a hurricane, snowstorm, pandemic, those are the kind of things that give rise to a 208D. So.
And from my standpoint, since March of 2020, the word emergency has been such a relevant term. And there have been so many conversations about it and what does it mean and how can we use it. So I would say that this is definitely from my standpoint, this is an important issue. Understanding it, examining it, and deciding how maybe you can do it better to help the council and future councils, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, and when I say it needs to be worded a little better, I think the issue, part of the issue is that 307I is kind of tucked in there, and it's something that definitely could use some clarification. You really have to kind of examine the language to see the difference, but I mean, it's clearly intended to the charter commission, the original charter commission intended there to be the difference. So yeah, it's one of those little esoteric points, but it is important, and we do, like Laura says, we are living it and have been living it for 2 years. So, which kind of leads a little bit into the next one: evaluate the need to update or amend Title VI of Article 1. As this one says by its terms, this is not a charter issue. I mean, this is a Title VI Article 1 of the code issue, and I agree that probably needs some updating. Considering that the impetus for it originally was riots back in the 60s, as opposed to hurricanes, pandemics, and that sort of thing. And so that said, it's really not a charter issue for consideration by the Charter Commission, in my view. So, and then number 16 is consider making the language in the charter more gender neutral. So the question I have on this one, I mean, I have no, yes, that there's no question that he, him is used. There's also a section in the charter that says, in the general provisions, that says that the, and whenever you use the masculine, it includes the feminine. There are a lot of, I know the state made changes to its constitution in 2021. It looks like to me, from what I did a little research, and we could certainly use that as a model. I guess my question is whether this can be done short of an actual putting it on the ballot question, and whether there's some way to do this short of that I would like to explore a little bit and see if we can do some type of corrective action that wouldn't require this. This doesn't seem like it really rises to the level of something that needs to be on the ballot to me, but I will certainly look at that and see what might be a good way to handle it. So that is all Fund 16. And under the charter, you are permitted to review all these plus others. This is the council's list for you. So if there's any questions, comments at any time, feel free to reach out, and I will be at all these meetings. If it's not me, it'll be somebody from my office, usually me. And we can certainly discuss them as we go along.
Great. Thanks, Lori. I mean, or Ms. Laura Klassmeyer, appreciate it.
No problem.
Mr. Kaufman, I see your hand is up.
Yes. What is the process for it? Let's say a grammatical error or just a very, very basic non-substantive adjustment amendment is required. Is it spelled out that it is a charter amendment that must be there has to be some, and is it, if it's not clearly spelled out, is that perhaps a charter amendment that we should take a look at putting in so that it provides that clarity moving forward?
There's nothing in there at the moment. That's why I want to do a little research. I would think that non-substantive changes could be permitted through some type of corrective bill, perhaps. And that's what we would do for the code. There's also some, I know that the council administrator has some leeway with the codifier in the code itself for certain corrections. So we'll definitely look at that. There's nothing spelled out at the moment, but however, I agree it might not be a bad idea to have something that says, to the extent there's a grammatical numbering. We have some, because we do have some of those in the charter. If you read through the charter, there are some. I've got little pencil circles around them, and so it's probably not a bad idea to have something like that.
Okay, great. All right, so why don't we do this? I know we have Mr. Power and Mr. Barron with us to talk about their comments from the administration. So why don't we hear from them, and then when we get into our discussions and deliberations as a commission, if we want to go back through and touch on some of these items that Ms. Blair-Klassmeyer just went over and determine if, we have how we want to proceed with some of those, we can have that discussion once we hear from the administration. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Power and Mr. Barron. I'm not sure who wants to speak first. I think it may be Mr. Power, it's you, because you're looking like you're
Sure, I'll jump in very quickly. Madam Chair, members of the commission, I'm Matt Power. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for Anne Arundel County. Thank you very much for having us here today. We're glad to be a part of your good work. We certainly respect the role that you have and the work that you'll be doing to help move the county forward. It's a big task ahead of you. Not only the things that Ms. Klausmeyer just ran through, but all the other things that I'm sure our residents are going to be coming to you to suggest, and as well as your own ideas. We recognize the council has given you your initial marching orders, so to speak, and know that you have a very aggressive timeline to accomplish an extremely significant task. So as an administration, we thoroughly believe in the need to periodically amend and modernize the county's charter. In 2020, we supported 7 charter amendments. There were the things this administration saw as critical to helping us govern better. I'll briefly summarize those, and I'm happy to give you the rationale for them if you're interested, or answer any questions you have on them at the end of this brief presentation. The first expanded the auditor's duties, which we supported. The second allowed the council to confirm the fire and police chief, which we also thought was very important. The third removed the limit of 1,500 hours per calendar year for contractual employees. The fourth increased the minimum value of purchases and contracts requiring full competitive bidding to range between $25,000 and $100,000. The next extended the probationary period of our sworn employees. The sixth expanded the acting capacity for department heads from 60 days to 120 days, with up to 2 additional 6-month periods instead of 1 4-month extension that existed previously. And the last placed the Human Relations Commission in the charter, which we also thought was extremely important. I'm happy to note that all 7 were passed by the voters of Anne Arundel County. And as a result of those 7 amendments, I'm also happy to report for all of you that we're not here before you today to suggest a number of specific amendments or a laundry list of things that we would like to see changed, but more so really just to offer our help and our assistance as you begin this endeavor. We want to make sure that you have access to the people and expertise required to help inform your work, and presume that you'll also be looking for feedback on how some proposed amendments that come before you might impact the actual operations of county government. And I can assure you that we're here to assist you and to try and use your time as efficiently and effectively as possible, as well as that of myself, the administration, and department heads, and the subject matter experts within each of those departments. So the council gave you a great starting list, and as an administration, we're happy to work with you on getting into additional details of those. Ms. Klausmeyer has already done a great job of that already. With respect to your charge, and as well as any of the other articles in the charter that you feel are important and worthy of further investigation and modifications, additions, or deletions. I will note that we firmly agree with the council's request that you consider making the charter more gender neutral. I fully accept Ms. Klausmeyer's opinion on the difficulties of figuring out the best mechanism to make that happen. But a current read of the charter makes it seem particularly antiquated. And while it does have a provision way down in the end that says, even if you were using the masculine gender, it really means masculine and feminine, it reads in a way that doesn't seem appropriate to the times. So we certainly hope you're able to come up and work with the Administration Office of Law Council to figure out a way to address that. On a personal note, I'm just greatly looking forward to working with you and helping ensure you have what you need to fulfill your charge. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have this evening or at any time throughout this process as you get into the real meat and substance of some of these particularly substantive and important issues for the residents of the county, as well as the operations of county government in general. With that, I'm happy to take any questions or hand it over to Mr. Barron for him to talk through the ways in which we think we can probably best streamline some of the information flow and make sure that you're getting what you need.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Pete Barron, I'm the Government Relations Officer for the county. I'll just add on to what Matt said. We want to help, and I think what we should talk a little bit about today is process to make sure that we're providing the commission with the relevant expertise as you need it. So we would ask, we have a lot of department heads, and I bring them to a lot of council meetings, so they're used to long night evening meetings, so that won't be unusual to them. But it does help if we get some notice in advance of the meetings about the subjects that you would like to discuss. And it would help us if you were to bring forward either through council staff, through Ms. Corby, or through Ms. Mansfield, particular items of note in writing, or at least a general sense of what you want to get at. We do have our department heads know a lot. They know about their department, but often there could be a subject matter expert in that department that would be better equipped to educate the commission. So please, please give us as much notice as you can in advance of these meetings for what departments you would like to show up, and give us as much notice as you can on the subject so we can make sure we get the right people in front of you. You all are doing this as a volunteer. I'd hate to get through a meeting and say, well, that's a really good question, and I don't know. I'll have to get a couple of people together and get back to you when I could have done that in advance. So I'll be your general point of contact, but you can always go to Matt as well. But I just ask that they come from one place, ideally either through Ms. Corby or through Ms. Mansfield, however you arrange it. And with that, like Matt said, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you both. Yeah, I think it worked well when we were going through the redistricting part of our discussion. Yes, Ms. Corby was our point of contact. Everything went through her to individuals that really through the planning and zoning at that point in time, because that was the one agency we were dealing with. And I think that worked really well that way. Yes, there was one point of contact. Everything went through Ms. Corby. And also what we did at the end of each of our meetings, we kind of try to reiterate, okay, these are the things we talked about. This is the information that we need. That way they had very clear direction at the end of that meeting, what they needed to work on to bring back for us at the next meeting. So I think what I'd like to propose, and I think hopefully everyone, we've already been operating this way, would be in agreement that that's what we would do at each of our meetings. At the end, we would kind of have the recap. So we would then, know we would have specific questions, or at least specific requests for information that we felt that we need for the next meeting. And ideally, and obviously I know, once we start having these conversations and we start seeing how long some of them might be as it relates to specific, well, I'll say articles, but really the topics that we need to discuss with our list. Obviously some meetings might take more time or might need more time. I don't know, but generally we'll be meeting every other week, and the opposite schedule from the council. So hopefully as we start having those, we should, we'll have at least a general framework. So hopefully we'll have, well, we may not know exactly, but if we get pushed off, but we'll know at least when topics are going to be coming up, or at least which of the items we'll be discussing and where they relate to each of the agencies. So hopefully it would be easy, or we could definitely we'll definitely coordinate with you guys to make sure all that pulls together well. Because yeah, so hopefully at least we'd have 2 weeks notice before something happens in an ideal world.
Yeah, I hated that. I hope we can, have some opportunities to email Laura during the weeks in between, so that we can have some information brought to the meeting, because I know meeting every 2 weeks, just like, during the redistricting, it was very difficult to be able to have a whole meeting, then figure out from that meeting whether or not we're going to be able to address a particular issue at the next meeting. So it bred like long meetings, first of all. It bred long meetings. And then it had us also kind of grasping for straws in between meetings. Well, I don't know about us, but me, on some of the different issues that we were working on. So I would, prefer to be able to provide that information to Laura, at least with some notice before the next meeting, maybe like a week's notice. But 2 weeks is just like, it's a little bit much for the few amount of meetings that we have left before April, and the amount of information that we have to go through. We have a lot of information to go through. We've received a lot of feedback today from Ms. Blair Klausmeyer in regards to these 16 different issues that the county council members have declared charter revision worthy. For some reason, they feel like these are charter revision issues. They may have been told previously that the charter impeded them from being able to accomplish some of these goals, which is probably why they asked for the Charter Revision Commission to review some of these goals. And, I hope that we can, again, review between meetings and send to Laura, with I would say 5 days notice, as opposed to 2 weeks notice, who may be coming to the next meeting.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess I think we also need to balance. I think what was important before, we wanted to be sure we were discussing in a public meeting the information and stuff that we wanted to have considered. So I think we need to be careful about that if we do correspond, between our meetings, that we're not going to be violating the open meetings requirements. But
I don't recall us having that issue during the legislative one, mostly because we didn't talk much between meetings. There wasn't much conversation between meetings, so
right, but
might
there
also
wasn't,
breed
because I
conversation
think we
between
also,
meetings.
because we had our conversations during the meeting and we set direction and talked through what information we needed and what we were going to request. And not that things might not pop up, but maybe what we could do is set some time on an agenda where we talk through those things a little bit regarding all the items, so we could start planning that up front a little bit more. But all right, thank you, Mr. White. We can continue to kind of massage that a little bit, see what works best. I know, Mr. Telford, you had your hand up.
Larry Telford for Matt Power. Mr. Power, thanks for joining us tonight. Quick question, since you brought it up, could you provide us between now and our next meeting, which I think is 3 weeks from now, a couple examples of where you think the charter is antiquated when it comes to gender and what the administration's recommended language change would be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can give you one just off the cuff, which is even for my position or any others, it always refers to the chief administrative officer as a he. He will do this, he will do that. There's no, and this is because of when it was written, and I think the notion was that many of these positions would only be occupied by males. And so it just, if you read it, it just comes off as pretty antiquated.
And what would the word he be changed to if the administration had its way?
I leave that to the commission to make their recommendations. I think that it could be gender neutral in multiple different ways.
Could the administration provide us some examples of what it thinks gender neutral means then to help us along?
We're happy to help assist, sure.
Okay, thank you.
I can say that when the code was scrubbed, that example would be to just repeat the word chief administrative officer every time instead of he. If you look in the code has very similar language, and it was scrubbed during the 2005 recodification.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, Mr. Snow?
Yes, actually, I just wanted to reiterate that I do believe that there exists a remedy for some of the challenges that have been brought up. We are working on a current schedule, which gives us 4 meetings prior to the submission of our final recommendations. We do have the option, as I understand, to go to October. So I remain fairly convinced that the pace that we're moving is extremely quick. It's extremely unwieldy very difficult to get the proper support and engagement and investigate these issues. So I just wanted to once again state for the record that I think we are moving way too fast.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snow. And actually, yeah, we may find when we start talking about Articles 1, 2, and 3 at our next meeting that, yeah, that we really don't get through them in that whole meeting, which is, yes, going to completely push off our schedule. Yeah. So, all right.
Madam Chair, can I offer something as well? In between meetings, I am here to help with resources. So if you look at this from the standpoint of, you're writing a report and you need resources, you need to, be able to go to the library and check things out. I would say that while you discuss and agree on the issues during the meetings in the public forum, so everybody can see what that is, in between meetings, as you're deciding how to approach those issues, if there's some help that you need, some advice, some guidance, resources from the law office, anything along those lines. If you're looking through the now infamous Green Book and you see something in there that was in the past and you want to somehow see a copy of that, just resources. I can certainly help connect you all to resources if that would help with your work. And if there's something that one commission member is able to identify, it may benefit the entire commission, and I can add it to the resources in the drive folder. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Corby. Sounds good. All right. Any more questions for Mr. Barron or Mr. Power? Okay, if not, great. Thank you both for being here. Sure, we'll be talking again. See you at the next meeting, Pete.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right. Yes, then that brings us to the discussion amongst us in terms of other items that you guys would like to put on the table for consideration over the next several months. And then based on the comments that we've received from Ms. Blair Klassmeyer tonight, I thought we could also go back and kind of run through those items and determine if there's anything on there that we want to look at, we think we should not be looking at, things like that, because that will also narrow our list going forward in our work. So I see a couple of hands. Mr. Coughlin, yours was up first.
Yeah, so in the spirit of the recommendation at the beginning of the meeting to identify which items may not necessarily need to be elevated to being a charter amendment, one thing I'd like to see us tackle, and whether or not it's a charter amendment or it's a recommendation to council, is I'd like to prescribe a timeline for which this body is assembled in its cycle. I know that we waited until the census was completed, but I would suggest that May 1st would have been perfectly acceptable for this body to have formed, established a rapport, worked on these charter amendment, non-district related charter amendments, and would have eliminated the blistering pace that we've had to be under. And we could have even suspended our work once we finally got like if we were really looking to address the timeline over the redistricting so that it hit, for the upcoming election. I think all of those things could have occurred had we still convened beginning in May when this process. What I don't know, Ms. Klassmeyer, is that a function of the charter indicating what and when we must convene, or is that a matter of practice that is part of a different layer of policy?
No, it is it is in the charter that the commission is formed once the census data is received. We are somewhat unique in that other counties have earlier. Some, especially for the charter review function, are formed separate from the redistricting function, have two different commissions, and sit every 2 to 4 years, or formed every 4 years or so to kind of look at the charter, which kind of makes some sense because the questions are going on the ballot. The charter questions are going on the ballot. The redistricting really is based on census data that's not going to have changed in those 10 years. So, but it was a function of the language in the charter as to the timing of the formation of the commission.
The second thing that I wanted to throw out, and this is not, this isn't for any kind of action tonight. Maybe I'm saying it so that Laura and you know, perhaps even staff. I don't know if it's a charter discussion with regards to campaign finance, but the ballooning extent to which campaigns for government positions that pay $50,000 a year or $100 and some thousand a year, the amount of money that's being spent and that seems to be required in order to get elected into these positions is a concern for me personally. It seems odd to me that people should be spending more in a campaign than the job pays in a year. And we're spending 2, 3, 10 times that sometimes. So I don't know if that's a charter function with regards to campaign finance, or whether or not that's just that's a different lane. But I really would like to be able to encourage us not to think that we should be spending our way into public service. So I don't know if I'm even asking a question. Is a relationship between how much a candidate can and should be spending even in any way related to being a charter function, or is that simply another lane of election finance expectations related to our county government?
So yeah, I was going to say maybe Mr. Barron wants to talk a little bit about financing.
Sorry, everyone. I thought I was done.
Thought he was done.
I took off my tie. Mr. Kaufman, actually, the county executive proposed resolution 1-22, which will be heard by the county council, which would authorize the creation of a public financing system. The Constitution would prohibit us, and Ms. Blair Klausmeyer could speak more to it, from requiring a system that limited campaign finance, I think the way you're suggesting. However, a voluntary system of public financing is being asked. We're asking the council to send it to the voters in 2 weeks.
Right, and if the voters approve it, then there would be legislation in the code that would actually set up the system for public financing. And there are limits. You can't accept the money can only accept it under certain conditions. And there are some expenditure limitations.
And I mean, so to be clear, I understand and appreciate that there are campaign finance rules and regulations. I'm speaking to ultimately whether or not our charter should address some type of cap to which a candidate can generate outside funds to be elected into one of these positions, because if it appears to me that if we do not address it, it will continue to steamroll, and at some level it feels like it needs to be addressed. And if I'm, again, as I've told you all before, if I'm the only person who thinks that, I'm happy to be the one out of a 6-1 discussion. But it's a real concern, because the finances are driving in government. I think that the finances are driving motivation more so than the service itself.
I'll just reiterate, Mr. Kaufman, I don't believe court and the current interpretation of everything would allow us to put any kind of cap, which is why when the county executive looked at this issue, we looked at a model of a voluntary system that is similar to systems that have been used across the country, as well as Montgomery County was the only county that had it up and running in 18, but in 22, I think you'll see this system in Howard and Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Prince George's are all online and getting started with their systems as well.
And I think that independent of this public campaign financing notion, most campaign financing is preempted by the state. I mean, there's only so much that the county can do because the state kind of controls that, other than the authority they've given us over this public campaign financing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so Mr. Snow, I know your hand was up. I saw Mr. Waddy's hand up, but was that related? Is it related to the campaign financing question? Because if it's not, I'm going to go to Mr. Snow, because his hand was.
Oh, go to Mr. Snow, definitely.
Okay, great.
I just want to say I do concur with Mr. Kaufman though, in terms of addressing the money is speech issue.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Mr. Snow.
Sure. No, I was just going to throw out my recommendations based on the compressed timeline and our desire for efficiency. It seemed like from the feedback that we got from Ms. Klausmeyer that issues 3 through 5 would not be in the purview of this commission. Issue number 15, being a code-related issue, would not be in the purview of this commission. And I just wanted to throw out there that I would be comfortable dismissing those from our list as we reorganize our list of issues to discuss. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Snow. Yeah, let me pull up. Yes, I would say, I think, obviously we need to hear from the other commission members, but yeah, I think we're item 3 dealing with compensation, and item 5 in particular for secondary employment just because of ethics reasons. The one where I may hesitate a little bit is item 4, where we talk about full-time versus part-time, and not in terms of having a discussion about what salaries and things would be for a member of the council, but if our charter only indicates it's a part-time council, do we want to look at that for potential change should at the point in time something might change and the salary commission wants to consider having a full-time salaries or something as things change in the out years, if that's something that might be worth consideration, just to provide flexibility as the salary commission has future discussions. But I think I would agree with you with items 3 and 5 in particular, as well as 15. Yeah.
If I understand correctly, isn't the charter ambiguous on the topic? Did I understand that right, Ms. Klausmeyer, on whether it's part-time or full-time?
It is silent on the subject.
So there would be nothing
Okay.
to prohibit. There would be nothing to prohibit the salary standards from making it a full-time position, if I understand.
Okay, and I misunderstood that.
We're compensating based on that notion that it's more full-time than part-time. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
So let me open that up. Mr. Waddy, I see your hand is up. It's a comment on.
I'm against that. I want to make sure we have that discussion, especially since we just hear that it's ambiguous on this issue of full-time and part-time, because it is a full-time job with and it deserves to be recognized as such by the charter, especially when it takes a charter revision for other employees of the county government to receive compensations. Because I know I believe there was that Mr. Powers mentioned the charter amendment that was passed last year that reduced the number of, if you have 1,500 hours or less, you work 1,500 hours or less, then you're getting paid part-time and you're not receiving benefits. I do recall that charter amendment being debated at the council, and I recall that it was passed, even though I didn't understand why that happened with this council. And so I'm of the mind that this council definitely needs to be given a little bit more information about how we can address that in the charter, how we can address those issues outside of the Salary Standards Commission. And, I think that the Charter Revision Commission would be a perfect place for that, to be able to have that discussion about the pay, the number of hours that they work, the benefits that they receive, the type of work that they do. I think that speaks to the discussion that you brought up earlier about the philosophical nature that you want to have around these discussions. That we need to definitely, show that the work that people are doing for the county, at the county council, on the county council, is valued. And the value that they provide goes beyond their, not just their compensation, but that their compensation should reflect that what they provide. And they've been keeping much of this county together during this past 2 years. When it's been falling apart at the seams due to corporate greed. So it's something I think we definitely need to maintain here, have that discussion about, get deeper into the weeds with, have a better understanding of how state law affects the hours that they work, whether or not county council members work the same number of hours as state delegates, and if they do, should they be compensated like state delegates? Do they work the same number of hours? Do they represent the same number of people as U.S. representatives? And if they do, how closely do they? If they don't, is there a similar analogy at the local level of or the state level of elected officials who get paid more? So I definitely think we need to have that discussion, and I would not just leave it up to the Salary Standards Commission to have that debate. First of all, so yeah, and then my point was that I wanted to bring up was going back to Mr. Snow's point of, if we are not going to meet more outside of these 4 meetings at this quote unquote hectic pace, then I have no problem going until October. There's no problem for me with that, especially because if we can't get any discussion outside of these meetings, I'd be happy to continue talking and going over these issues with you all through October. Even if we can go till next October, that's not a problem for me. But I would love to be able to have this done by April, if we could have more conversation outside of these meetings, even in small groups. But that's again, if we're going to continue going at this pace that we're on right now, which is a meeting we have 4 meetings left and really no time outside of these meetings for discussion, then I'm gonna definitely go along with what Mr. Snow has to say about continuing through October.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Waddy. Mr. Fleckenstein, I know your hand was up next, and both comments on Mr. Snow's, I assume it was related to what Mr. Snow suggested, but if you have thoughts and views on how we progress going forward, that's fine too.
No, it was in response actually to what you and Mr. Snow began the discussion with. It does seem sensible to get rid of 3 and 5 at this juncture, given the guidance we've been given from Ms. Klassmeyer. It does seem to me that it merits at least a little more discussion, a little more study on item 4, for the simple reason that we know that the Salary Standards Commission just issued a report. I'd kind of like to see what I have not reviewed this, so I wouldn't mind reviewing what they did and what, if anything, they did or didn't do, and if there was any rationale as to why they may or may not have relative to the council. It seems to me that there is, the ambiguity itself, given the guidance, and I guess, what we call the green book, that it's intended to be a part-time position. It seems to me, in my experience, that most people who deal with the council and the council members themselves kind of feel like whether it's the charter or the green book or whatever, that it's supposed to be a part-time position. And I think it's probably something we could deal with quickly. But if in this day and age, it's become really a full-time position, maybe it's appropriate for this commission to maybe eliminate any ambiguity and maybe set that forth in the charter. And so for that reason, I would agree with the chair that maybe we don't eliminate that just yet, maybe give that a little extra investigation, even if it's just a matter of some of us kind of personally investigating and educating ourselves on the issue, and then dealing with that later on. But I do think the idea of eliminating some of these issues right off the bat, as Mr. Snow has proposed, is very sensible. And I would agree, 3 and 5 seem to be beyond our purview, definitely.
Okay. And Mr. Stone, the other one was item 15, correct? Which
That's
I need to
correct,
scroll
'cause
back
that's a
up to remember
code.
what it was.
Yeah, the only reason I recommended that one was because it's a code issue as opposed to the charter.
Okay, right.
The gender neutrality issue.
No, that was the.
That was
emergency.
16.
That was 15. I noted it in my notes here.
That's the Title I question. I don't mean to interrupt, but I have a little background on that. The council, this goes back to the confusion that remains over emergencies in the county. And there was a council member that wanted that to be looked at in the sense that it could be connected to the charter. So there have been limitations, there have been questions, there's been even some confusion, as we've talked about. So I think that, again, the idea behind looking at that is that the whole idea of emergencies could be connected to the charter. Is there some way to make it cleaner, easier to understand, something like that? And I'm certain that Ms. Blair Klassmeyer can add something here that might help.
If I understand real quick, wouldn't those be addressed by the previous two items, which do specify those discussions and definitions in the charter?
Sure, quite possibly, yes. But I just, from the standpoint of sort of background and understanding why that was put in there, I think there are some questions for council members that come from different places. For example, if someone brought it up, they have run into limitations to what they can do legislatively because it's not in the charter or the charter doesn't allow it. So when any council member might be looking at the code, they're probably looking at it from that standpoint, like they have found a limitation because it's not in the charter. Also, we've had some recent charter amendments that have been done, the one that was done in 2020, and then one that was just passed the other night that adds commissions to the charter. The Human Relations Commission a few years ago, and then the Veterans Affairs Commission was just added the other night. And a lot of people said, well, why do you need to do that? Because those commissions are in the code. The point behind putting them in the charter was to make it more serious, solidify it. So like it's easier to do a bill to repeal law in the code. It's pretty difficult to repeal stuff in the charter because it has to go on the ballot. So it was just a protection that they were looking for. So again, I think when they're throwing code questions out there, the council members are seeing stronger protections if something is in the charter. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think I'm still seeing those as connected to the previous two items though, because those are the emergency elements of the charter. And so any recommendations that we make to revise those, I feel like we would capture those under those two items unless I'm reading, I could be reading it wrong, but I'm looking at allowing the use of emergency ordinances, but then number 14 specifically apply to emergency ordinances and the procedures for passing emergency ordinances. I feel like that would kind of cover, if we clarified it, it would capture whatever changes would be needed. Because it said that in number 15, it says the need to update or amend Title 6 of Article 1. We literally cannot do that.
Yes.
We can't update it or amend it. So.
And I get that. And I'm happy to get any clarification on any issues that you decide to hold on to this evening, if that would help you in your future work too.
Sure. And then in response, I guess in clarification to the questions about the full-time versus part-time, can I better understand why we feel that the Salary Standards Commission, whose explicit job is to evaluate these items, would be insufficient as opposed to us, who have a lot of issues to look at, why we feel we would be better equipped to have this conversation than a commission specifically formed for that specific issues. And I think I'd ask for some clarity on that point.
Well, from my perspective, is that I think that the charter is where the Salary Standards Commission is codified, and as the Charter Revision Commission, I think we have to address we're the overarching part of that umbrella, and so that's my perspective on that. Is that, you know, looking at it from the government operations standpoint, we are the overarching umbrella in that discussion, and evaluating whether or not the Salary Standards Commission. First of all, we haven't seen this report. Those of us, I haven't seen it, and I just heard that another commissioner hasn't seen it either. So I would say, hi, Kitty, that addressing both of them. Well, I don't even want to address whether or not the Salary Standards Commission is necessary. I think it's great. I think that the Salary Standards Commission is great. I also think that, you know, we need to, as the council member asked us, to review the Salary Standards Commission's report, have it be debated in regards to all of those issues that the Charter Revision Commission was asked to debate. Those are my opinions on whether or not why we need to have that discussion. But in regards to, I think you also addressed civil emergencies. And I mean, I'm all for if we have that debate over civil emergencies in the discussion about emergencies, I have no problem with that. But, you know, just taking out the question about Title VI or Title I is not something that I would want to remove from our discussion. The civil emergencies issue is particularly relevant in this moment. And from my perspective, you know, others may not feel as though we should talk about these issues, but I think we do. We have to. I think it would be, you know, a dereliction of our duty if we ignored the political moment that we're in right now, and just, you know, said, "Oh, civil emergencies is not something we shouldn't be talking about because that's too political." So again, I think we should, I don't, if anything, I think we should take out some of this discussion about budgets and, you know, taxes. And, you know, I wouldn't remove the discussion around, you know, the pay for council members. I do appreciate Mr. Kaufman adding a discussion about the election system and how the election system is funded through campaign finance. And, you know, those are my opinions on that.
Okay, so Mr. Fleckenstein, your hand was up, but it's not up any longer. Do you have a comment? Because you were in the queue before Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Snow again. So we want to make sure
No,
we didn't.
I was going to add something, but Mr. Waddy kind of addressed it, and I don't want to belabor the point at this point. So no, that's why I took my hand down.
Okay, great. All right, Mr. Kaufman.
It would be helpful for me in this discussion around full-time and part-time, to what extent that language determines compensation. So as an example, I started my career as a teacher. I was just above 0.5, so I was a benefited teacher in my first year, even though I was a part-time teacher. So my question is, other than simply using the language full-time or part-time, it would be helpful for me to see how the language defines their role, and if it's not particularly, I mean, if by having been functioning as part-time employees or part-time council members, they've assumed full-time responsibilities, and that's the function. I'm just wondering whether either full-time or part-time designation in the charter is even necessary, if it's the nature of the job, and then the compensation can and should be what it is. Like let the salary commission do its due diligence in evaluating the number of hours that are worked, But if there are specific elements of having been defined as part-time that address responsibilities, then I think that that's a different conversation. So it would be helpful for me if we're able to kind of drill down as to what the charter language is calling for in a part-time council member.
So do you want me to respond to that? Is that?
Either, well, I mean, and if it's a quick answer, yeah. If it's we'll get stuff to you, that's fine too. But
well, I can give you a quick answer. I mean, the quick answer is it's not in the charter. And I think that, and the quick answer on the compensation and the compensation package is it's not treated the same as a county employee who would be considered part-time versus full-time. Yes, if you're a regular classified county employee, it makes a difference because your benefits are based on, that status, and you do have a status. You're either full-time or part-time or contract or whatever. So when, their compensation package is a number, it's a dollar amount, but it's also a benefits package that is specified through the Salary Standards Commission and then approved through ordinance. So does it matter in the sense, as far as benefits and that sort of thing, as whether they're classified as full-time or part-time. And
yeah, so I would just say, and again, maybe this is Ms. Mansfield, feel free to mute me if I'm extending the conversation. But it would seem inappropriate for the county council to be listed as full-time members in the charter and then have a fiduciary decision-making regarding any type of benefit element or have something come across their desk as it relates to full-time employees for the council. Like for me, the current dynamic where there's a separate salary commission for this group of elected officials makes a lot of sense because it insulates them from impacting their own benefits or salary packages. And I think there's value to that. And the public, I think, would view that as being a level of accountability to the public more direct than to an executive that they may be friendly with or to other members of the like. It just seems to be a complete layer of oversight that I would hate to see get muddied up by us injecting a defining element that they're a full-time employee and therefore lumped into a larger conversation about compensation. But I don't have any problem with paying them more. I just think that shouldn't necessarily be in the context of the general day-to-day operations of the government and the annual budget. I think that should be a separate commission that handles that. But I'll mute myself now, Ms. Mansfield.
Okay. I would just want to jump in. I mean, yeah, I was, and I think I misunderstood Ms. Blair-Klassmeyer when she was going through the various sections. I in my head, I thought there was some language in the charter that referred either to part-time or less than full-time, or there was something in there that would prohibit the salary commission, should they decide to look at this issue in the next, I don't know, I'm not sure how often they do their meetings and when they look at this stuff, but that it would present a problem for them in the work that they would do in making a determination about that. That's where my head was when I made the comment. I guess I'm curious though, I mean, obviously commissions and things are specified in the charter. And should we be looking at what the salary commission's responsibilities are? I mean, instead of us, because I would agree, if there's a process that's in place to determine what the compensation is for the council member, I think we should honor that process. It was put in, it was established for a reason, probably because they wanted to have some sort of a separation there in a more of an independent group looking at this to make recommendations. But I guess I'm wondering if there might be something in the charter specific to the salary commission that maybe we should be looking at or not. I mean, I don't know. I haven't read that section of the charter to know what it says, but I wonder if there's something there that maybe we should look at more closely to ensure these types of issues can be adequately addressed as they do their work in the future.
I'm also wondering if there was something from the Salary Standards Commission in their report, since we haven't had the chance to look at it yet, that mentioned the charter, any changes in the charter. Did the Salary Standards Commission even make any recommendations in regards to changes in the charter? So, I mean, there's something, still question that's out there.
Okay. And Mr. Snow, I see your hand is up.
Sure. I was just going to reiterate, and several of you have touched on this, that I'm concerned that by weighing in on this, we would inherently limit the ability and flexibility of salary standards to evaluate some of these things. And I do believe that our task is to decide what needs to be added to the charter, removed from the charter, or changed within the charter, which is part of the reason I'm looking at this mountain of things that we need to get done in the next 4 weeks. And I'm saying, if we're going to, eat this elephant, let's figure out what we need to not, what we need to not focus on. And so, to me, turning this into a platform for, debating the merits of some of these issues. I mean, if we had, a lot of time to work through, that would be fine and well. But I feel like, given the task and the timeline that we're working with, and given the fact that we already have mechanisms in place to address some of these things, I feel it would be inefficient for us to divert energy towards this. And I think we're in a better situation with the charter being ambiguous on this to give more flexibility to adapt as needs change, right? I mean, if we, do make decisions about the number of council members, I mean, that could put everything into disarray, right? At one point they may be full-time, then they may be part-time, and then you got to wait 10 years to make any changes. Similarly, with the civil emergency, while I'm taking issue specifically with the fact of us saying we should update or amend the code, and we literally can't do that. So, I mean, I think that I'm just trying to eliminate the things that are within the scope of our work. And that's my last word on that. I have nothing more to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Snow. I appreciate that. I think our minds were thinking along the same lines on that, actually. Yeah, I think with respect to 15, because I think you're right. I mean, we will be dealing with the emergency sections and with the prior two items. And I mean, I would agree with you. I think, we're not here to update the code. I mean, that's kind of would be a result of further other types of discussions that take place. So I think I would feel comfortable eliminating item 15. I think after our discussion, not that I still don't know if I would agree they're not part of our scope, but I guess I'm wondering if we should at least have a chance to review the salary commission's report. That's come up, and also if we should look at that section. And I'm not sure, Ms. Blair Klassmeyer, if you know, like in the salary commission section, if there is something we should be looking at necessarily, but if that's something we should at least look at before we completely eliminate 3, 4, and 5, or maybe 4 anyway.
Yeah, so that's what I was kind of pulling up, the various law. I mean, they don't seem to be established by the charter. They are in the code, but it's one simple sentence that says it's 7 members appointed every 4 years, but there's a link to, it's really controlled by state law. And I was trying to find a way to share the link with you, but apparently because of this being in this webinar or whatever, this particular panel discussion, I can't share there's no conversation where I could stick a link in, but I will share with Laura the state law, which really sets forth their functions of the Salary Standard Commission. And let me get back to it. They meet every 4 years, and they come up with a report, an increase or decrease in compensation and allowances. And the county council can reduce or reject the recommendation, but they can't increase any item. And then obviously any increases are effective for the next elected members. And the state constitution prevents members from increasing their compensation while they are sitting. So it can only apply to the next. And it looks like Ms. Corby has sent an email with the link to the report, which is on the county council. Yeah. Looks like it's still on the county council's website.
Okay.
And yeah,
okay, so then there's nothing in the charter that refers to the salary commission.
No, I did not find. It's not created through the charter. It's created, and actually the state law says created through ordinance. This commission itself gets created through ordinance. So
it's a strange way that they do that one.
Yes.
I think that the provision in the charter that talks about council compensation was obviously in there in 1964. the state law that created salary standard commissions, or at least the authority to create one. I think it's in the local government article. Is that right, Lori?
Yeah, 10302. Yep.
So it's they authorized counties to establish a salary standard commission, which the county did in its code, right? In that section that Lori cited from county code. And it's real simple. It just says there's a salary standard commission, basically. And then you go back to state law to see what it is that the salary standard commission can do and how they're formed. They're formed basically in the end of the third year of the council, of the sitting council. And they have to report to the council basically by their second meeting in December. And so that's why the timing happened for the salary standard commission the way that it did. And they have certain things that they have to do, and somehow, and Lori will explain this, but somehow the state law that was put in place after the charter provision allows the charter provision to actually be ignored, because the charter actually says in a bit of a confusing way that the council shall get $2,100 per year. But they get more than $2,100 per year. And that's allowed because of the state law and the connected county code provision that says there's a salary standard commission. So if that confused you thoroughly, you are following, you're following
Yes.
exactly.
Following the bouncing ball. Yeah. So it sets the minimum,
Okay.
and then the state law says the compensation cannot be less than what's in the county charter. So
Okay.
over the years it's been increased.
Ms. Hewitt is not here, so I hate to speak for her, but I believe she raised this at the last meeting when you were talking about issues to study. She said that that causes a lot of confusion, and she's right. It does cause confusion. And we often, every 4 years, we go through this exercise. We have to re-explain it all. Like, well, the charter says this, but state law says this, and and this is why we can do it this way. So anyway,
And there are some, and the county executive is the same way. His is set at 30,000 in the charter. And there are some antiquated, examples in state law as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to say it's like the sheriff's salaries or something. There's different salaries in there that are kind of were set years ago, but then have been able to be changed through other mechanisms, so that you end up with kind of the minimum in the code. It's it's kind of antiquated and funky, but it's kind of there. So
Okay. Well, now that I'm kind of really confused and I'm feeling a little unsettled, I'm like, all right, well, maybe we should just not go ahead and strike these from our conversation. And we need at least have a better understanding as to what these minimums and these antiquated things look like before doing that. Not because I want us to get into the job or the role of setting the salary for a council member. I guess I'm feeling now more that maybe there's something there that maybe should be updated so it's not so antiquated and makes a little more sense. And I don't know. And I see two hands. I know, Mr. Snow, yours has been up for a little bit. Let me go to you, and then Mr. Telford. Yours went up with my comment.
So if this is determined by state law, does anything we do at the charter level matter? Doesn't the state law trump that?
well, the state law doesn't say full-time, part-time. It just sets out how those salaries are procedurally, how those salaries come about. So as I say, I'm struggling to figure out what difference it makes in a sense, whether we call them full-time or part-time, because all of it, everything is set through this salary standard commission process, including benefits. Like I said, there's no determination necessary for full-time or part-time to determine how much benefits they receive. So the salary standard commission is looking at how much they work, what salaries are in other jurisdictions, how much they work, that kind of thing. And then they're coming up with their recommendations, which either turn into legislation or they don't. I want to say it was like 18 years between raises for the council. They just raised it recently. I mean, maybe it was before the start of this particular one, I think, is the first time they had raised salaries in like 18 years. So I appreciate, I mean, it's to say, it's not language, it's in the charter, and I appreciate kind of the conundrum of a notion of part-time, but like I say, I'm not sure that it's particularly relevant if they're not getting, you can't affect their pay or benefits based on full-time versus part-time, if that makes.
Yeah, so we would further muddy the waters by making additional changes to the process, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, you really can't make changes to the process because it's, it's a state,
Thank you.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Telford.
Mr. Snow stole my thunder. Whatever he just said is exactly what I was thinking. It sounds like in the U.S. Constitution, it talks about the minimum size of congressional district. It doesn't talk about the maximum size. And it sounds like that's what we have here. This is being driven by state law. And given we have 4 meetings, I think it'd be easier for us to address maybe the 12 other issues we hopefully will focus a little bit more on. And that's all I need to say.
All right. Okay, I know
Excuse me, I would, is it possible we could vote tonight on if we want to move on from some of these issues, and how would that work? And do we need 4-3? Does it have to be 5-2? Ms. Mansfield, any thoughts on, because this is going to happen down the road anyway with all these other.
Yeah, actually, that's where I was going to go next. Yep, but thank you. Yes. And I know Mr. Snow, he put out that we eliminate from our discussion items 3, 4, 5, and 15. Obviously, we've been talking about really 3, 4, and 5, or really 4 in the last regard. And I think your last point was actually on point too. I mean, it's a salary commission process. It's governed by the state. I think there seemed to be an agreement from our legal counsel that mucking with it would make it worse. So I am good with that. So I guess I'm not sure if we have consensus, but I guess I would like to put out there that for our discussion purposes and for our consideration that we eliminate items 3, 4, and 5, and 15 from our discussion.
I'll second.
I have a second. All right, any further discussion or comments from commission? All right, so then all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Was that unanimous? I guess, can we do a?
No.
Okay, Mr. Waddy. No.
Definitely not unanimous.
6-1. Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear you say anything down there, or see your box light up as you were speaking. And your camera's on.
I got booted out, and my daughter I've been helping her with her homework,
okay.
So I apologize.
So just so I can get it right in the minutes, I heard 6 in the affirmative and 1 in the negative. Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, awesome. All right, moving on then. Okay, so it sounded like, all right, so that means, are there other items that Ms. Blair Klassmeyer went through tonight that you want to put on the table for discussion to remove? And Ms. Hanglighter, I see your hand is up.
I wanted to check in. I know we're going to look at each of these things individually, but as we try to prepare, given that we do have 2 weeks in between each meeting, is there any way we can start a request for documents on multiple of these different items? There was so many that I'm kind of looking through, writing down notes. How would you like to go about doing that?
I would say yes, if you have a request for documents, let's go ahead and discuss it now. Because I think the more we get that out on the front end, the better it's going to allow Ms. Corby to plan, as well as the administration to plan, what type of, who needs to be here to speak and how we want to go about getting those and getting them on our Google Drive. I guess before we jump into that real quick, because I heard in the discussion a little bit ago, there were a couple of items that came up which seemed to be like additional things we might want to look at. One is the charter, and how the charter specifies when this commission is formed. And it currently says it is formed once the data is received. And that seems like something we probably want to look at. Should the future review commission get into the same situation we're in, it's addressed, and they can actually start their work earlier to address these items. So I'd like to put that on the table for our discussion. And I think the other item was whether there should be two separate commissions, one that looks at redistricting and one that looks at charter revision items. I guess I'd like to put that on our list of things to look at too. And then with that, were there other items that we want to, okay, Mr. Telford, I see your hand is up.
A quick question for county staff. If we do create two separate commissions, is that going to cause any problems that you can see down the road? Because if obviously you only have one commission, you kind of know what's going on. But if you have two commissions, particularly if they're meeting simultaneously, could that possibly stretch your resources too thin? Or would we make sure that the two commissions, those one doesn't start until the second one is completed their work, I guess is one option. But sort of off the top of your head, what would you think about having two versus one? Thanks.
Lori, would you like me to respond?
I'll let you respond from your perspective. Sure.
So first of all, I want to say thank you for your thoughtfulness. That is an incredible extension of thought there to staff. So we make it work. And I would say that the question for you as a commission is certainly of greater importance than how it would be staffed. And so right now, my ability to do it, if you broke it out into two commissions, might be a little bit of a challenge. However, if you leave the provision in section 1203 that talks about if there's money in the budget that we can hire help for you, that would actually help soften the blow. And I would suggest that if you broke these out into two commissions in the future, if we needed to hire additional help on a temporary basis, we would do it. And we would be able to do it because of that particular provision in section 1203. So that's my response.
I mean, from the perspective, you know, I have plenty of people too. I appreciate it, but I have people I don't have to do it all. And we can run two. Really, they wouldn't be running at the same time. I mean, that's kind of, if you do one, you know, like I said, charter revision commission, and you go with a model where it's more than every 10 years, they aren't necessarily even on the same schedule. So it's really not problematic from our perspective as far as staffing.
Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Kaufman, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, so obviously the council has advanced things to move on. The most recent being the Veterans Commission to become a charter amendment or revision, absent this commission doing anything. So, I guess what is the primary rationale, other than to have 7 more people from the community being involved, if the council is able to move forward charter amendments on their own, absent a commission having to forward them? What is it that is actually necessary about this body, or is it's I guess what is it that's necessary about this body if the council can go ahead and advance something on without this body convening?
So I think the notion is that you do want every so often citizens to take a look, and people that aren't necessarily involved and come from an outside perspective to take a look at what might need to be tweaked. I think that's probably what the framers of the charter.
I absolutely believe that to be the case. So the real question for us is whether or not we believe that input should take place every 4 years, or whether or not it needs to be taking place in alignment with the census. That's really, I think, the only discussion. We already know that the commission exists. So our discussion really is just centered about how frequently should or would this type of oversight take place.
And I guess, well, and maybe when we get to that point, we can just debate that in more detail when we take that up. But Yeah. So Mr. Fleckenstein, I see your hand is up.
It is. Thank you. I, I would struggle, I think, and I agree with David as to why we would possibly want to have create a second commission just to do redistricting. For a lot of the reasons that he suggests, there's a lot of things that this commission does that's extraneous already. In many ways, the council, particularly when it comes to redistricting, functions as a second commission anyway. I think the bigger issue, if we address the timeline problem, in other words, if we had, I completely agree with Mr. Snow. There's no reason in the world, realistically, we could not have been meeting, getting our education, discussing issues, even if we're waiting for the census, right? We could have had some of the philosophical discussion we had about, hey, what do we think districts should look like? What should the story of the county be? What, we could be doing all of that. We could be having all of these discussions. And I think if that were the case, that certainly that would address, I think we're only even thinking about a second commission because of the time compression we face. I think if we address, and I think it's exactly right to get in line with more of the other counties and get the commission up and running on a 10-year basis, more early in the year, so to speak, or not having to wait for the census numbers, because Lord knows what the politics of that's going to be in the future. I think that addresses the issue. And I just, to add another commission just seems completely extraneous and unnecessary. But addressing the appointment, I think, is correct.
I'll remove that one from our consideration.
Oh, okay.
You beat me down and won me over.
All right. Well, then my night is complete.
Mr. Snow?
Mr. Fleckenstein said everything I was going to say. So thank you. Save me some time.
Great. All right. So, Mr. Waddy?
Independent redistricting commissions have been the move for the past, I guess, 60 years. And so I would definitely support having a separate redistricting commission independent of, our various appointments that I think would warrant having a second commission. It's been going on for a while now, and it helps to reduce some of the politicization of they say it's supposed to of redistricting. So yeah, I'm for having two separate commissions. I would actually, yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Waddy. Mr. Telford?
Larry Telford, despite my concern about staffing, Ms. Mansfield, I actually like your idea of looking at having two different commissions looking at these two different issues. I just want everyone to know that.
Okay. All right. So I guess given some of the comments and where we are, I guess maybe we should then discuss and take a vote as to whether this is something we want to consider going forward or not. I'm not sure where we're.
Yeah, I certainly think that there's merit in having the conversation, even if the end result is that we don't do it. But the idea isn't meritless. It's just a matter of whether or not it, after we have a better understanding. Like my question to council was to really try to make sure that I understood clearly what the function of that cycle really was and the function of the commission. It's not discounting your suggestion. It's just accumulating information.
Okay, so then let me just do this sort of, so do we have consensus then? We'll leave it on. We can discuss it further and decide how we want to address it. Consensus? Okay, cool. All right.
Sure.
Got consensus for that. All right, thank you. All right, so before we get into the question and the list of resources issue that Ms. Hangleiter brought up, any other items from commission members to put on our agenda for consideration? I know we have the comments from the public that we have heard earlier. I know we need to go through those comments and see how we want to factor those things into our discussions, which working with Ms. Corby, we can figure that out and send something to you guys. But are there other items that you want to put out on the table for discussion for charter revision?
Yes, I'm wondering the role of independent councils or different boards and commissions. If we can get some more information about that, I'd really appreciate whether or not the charter precludes boards and commissions from having independent counsel, or they have to be represented by county attorneys?
So
Okay.
I mean, most all the boards and commissions don't have separate legal existence. I mean, the county is one legal entity. When you say provide legal counsel, we are counsel to the county executive, counsel to the county council. So we provide legal guidance when questions come up for boards and commissions. Could they have another legal advisor? Could they have a legal advisor? There's a couple of issues there. One is money, because most boards and commissions don't even have a budget. Their money, any money, they don't really spend money. And to the extent that they spend money, it comes through a departmental budget usually. So
is that in the charter as well, in terms of budgeting for boards and commissions?
Is it in the charter?
I mean, I would love to hear more, have a more research done about that as well, in terms of boards and commissions being able to have compensation for their members, be able to spend money, in terms of the allocation, what the legal ramifications are of that within the charter. It's the boards and commissions are a vital function of our government, and I think as being on one, it helps to have a strong board and commission to be able to understand, some of the legal ramifications that don't include county attorney opinions. If you may be representing, have a conflict of interest in a particular issue that may be going on between the county and another entity. So those, or even within county entities, if a board or commission issues an opinion that might be different from another agency's opinion, and then the county is representing both sides in that discussion, there might be a conflict between the two. And I'm sure there are conflict protocols that you all engage in, but having an independent legal counsel would help to, remove many of those concerns around conflicts as well, or it might, increase concerns about conflict. But I mean, I'm not necessarily asking you to answer that question tonight as much as I am putting it on the table for us to be able to add as a discussion when we have this, when we talk about boards and commissions.
Sure. And one of the things I can do moving forward in the future is kind of talk about the different kinds of boards and commissions, because there are many different kinds of boards and commissions, and their roles are defined in different ways, either through state law. Some of them are state law, some of them are county law, some of them are executive order. There are advisory commissions. There are commissions that have administrative adjudicatory type functions. So yes, there's lots of types of commissions, and I can certainly, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was tasked with creating the boards and commissions summary, and it ended up being like a 5-inch binder, which I'm happy to share with you. Talk about bedtime reading when you can't sleep. But there's a broad range, and I can certainly put together something where I kind of go through the different types of boards and commissions that there are. And, there are, like I said, we represent the county council and we represent the county executive. And that in that function, we have the conflict type protocols in place, confidentiality protocols. We have lots of attorneys, and we can assign people that don't talk to each other and don't no. So, but we can talk about all of that. I will put that on my list of things to, at some point when we get to that part, we can certainly discuss all of that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Blair-Klassmeyer. Mr. Snow.
Can I better understand the connection between the boards and commissions and the county charter? Like, can you give us just a brief overview of how they might be related and how the charter might impact those?
Sure. And I think Ms. Corby might have touched on this, or maybe Mr. Barron earlier. So there are certain boards and commissions that are created in the charter. And then there are some that are created in the code, and there are some that are created in state law. And then there are some that are created and required by state law. And then there are some that are created by executive order. And the issue becomes the permanency of those boards and commissions. So, for example, with the Veterans Commission, there is a charter amendment that's going on the ballot to require a Veterans Commission that the county have one, and it'll be in the charter. And the reason that somebody would want to do that is that it makes it a lot harder to get rid of the Veterans Commission, because now to get that section, if it's passed and it becomes effective, to get that out of the charter in the future, you'd have to go back to the ballot. Right now, it is in the code, but any county council could come along and repeal those sections that relate to the Veterans Commission.
Just sorry to interrupt, just to save you some time though. When it comes to the charter, though, does the charter do much more than declare the existence of a board? Does it have prescriptive measures within it to oversee the administration of that versus the code?
Most of the time, it is just, there's a couple, sometimes it's just the requirement that it exists. There are a couple that it does have kind of powers and duties, like the Spending Affordability Commission is in there. Obviously, this commission is in there. So there are some where there are kind of broad membership strokes, and then some powers and duties. And then there are others where it's just requiring that they exist, and then they're created otherwise through the code.
So I think that my follow-up, I guess, to the commission might be to request that if we go down this road, that we scope it within those boards and commissions that are managed by the charter, because I do think that this could spiral very quickly into something that's way beyond our scope. So just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Yep. No, thank you, Mr. Snow. Point well taken. Okay. All right. Given all of that, any other items to put on the table before we go to our next item? All right. Okay. Seeing none. All right, Ms. Hanglighter, we'll go back to you, because I would like us to have, as at each of our meetings, I mean, I'd like us to have this conversation at the end, so we know exactly what we're going to be asking for, resources we think we need. So that's, we have all that on the table going forward to help staff, Ms. Corby and county staff, to plan and have sufficient time to plan to the best of our ability or their ability to do these things. So Ms. Hanglighter.
Well, I hope this can be a very open conversation that we can all easily chime in. I know that there are we're going to have multiple meetings, and these are going to grow, but some of them were easy to find, like the Salary Standard Commission. I think they're pretty open, but then some of the ones, like the agreements between the fire department and volunteers, I've not been able to find any information on that. And before I think we can address it, there's a lot more to it than it may be publicly available, but I can't find it. The gender neutrality question, I was really hoping that the Office of Law may be able to provide us with what the state passed, as well as what any other local jurisdictions or has been discussed at a national level, and kind of all different levels. I know that there is one that's 42 different pronouns, or what are the options are. I would also like to see something in regards to the history on the councilmanic districts. I apologize if this was already discussed, and you can chime in on me there, but my understanding is at one point we did have at-large members, but we did not. Okay.
No, it's always been 7 districts with 1 member from each district, and no at-large.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was misinformed. And then just in that document that you sent over, I did not see anything about the term limits you had sent over that very informative document for the counties, but I just wanted to see if you could provide us with what the term limits are on all the other counties in the state.
Do you want all counties, or would you just like other charter counties?
Other charter counties is fine. Okay. Yeah, there's 7. Sorry to give you a laundry list, but
no problem.
And I'm sorry, I'm trying to go back to where I had the resolution pulled up, and now I can't get it to the Google Drive.
Oh, no.
I'm like, I forget which tab it's under. Let's see, that's today. Here we go. All right. Okay, well, before I do that, I guess, do other members have information and backgrounds they would like to mention for staff? Mr. Kaufman?
It would be helpful on the discussion about the fire chief having oversight for the volunteers. It'd be helpful to understand whether or not that was requested by the fire chief, whether or not that was requested by volunteers, and whether or not there's known feedback from either entity. Oftentimes those tend to be, I don't want to have the Charter Commission unwittingly be involved in a turf discussion that we're not aware of. And that's, I think it would just be valuable to go into that eyes wide open rather than contribute to friction unwittingly.
Great. Okay, Mr. Snow?
Yes, I do know that there has been some discussion about tax caps and tax limits and things like that. And I was just wondering if it's possible to have any of the historical background on how that discussion has flowed through the years. I know currently it seems to be, I think it's centered around property taxes right now, but as we consider income taxes, how that discussion has been handled over the years, I think that context would be pretty helpful. And if there's other charter counties that have approached this, topic, that would just be some helpful background information to have.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I guess a couple of things that I'm interested in, and this would actually be for our next meeting, since we'll be discussing the first couple articles, which will encompass items number 1 and 2 from the resolution. One is examine the benefits of increasing the number of councilmanic districts, and the other is going possibly from 3 full consecutive 4-year terms from the current 2. I guess I'm curious, specifically with the districts, and I think this would be the other like larger charter counties. We do have, I guess I would like to see how many districts they have, what the population is for each of their districts. And even, if they do have some at large or not, just so we could get a comparison as to what the size of our districts are compared to, Prince George's, Montgomery, Baltimore County, things like that, just to kind of help us put it into perspective, in terms of numbers. Because I know Baltimore County doesn't. I mean, Prince George's and Montgomery County, they definitely have more council members than we have here in Anne Arundel County. Baltimore City does as well. I don't think Baltimore County does.
I
can't remember.
I think Baltimore County also has 7, or they did. I still do.
That seems right. Yeah.
And Montgomery County, I want to say they have 11. But they have a number of at large. I mean, and they changed not too long ago. So, because we kind of looked at some of this, but I can put it together.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And then also, which of those jurisdictions may have, provide for 3 full terms versus 2.
Okay. Yep.
And then I know we talked about some of the budget items, both evaluating whether to increase or amend items in the budget, as well as the bond initiatives. So I think Ms. Blair Classify, you're going to do some additional research on those items. I know that's not necessary for our next meeting, but
yeah, and I can get you some info. I guess on the bond initiatives, I think we're going to get some clarification. Ms. Corby's going to get some clarification on the increasing. I can do kind of the similar thing as look at other charters and see if other counties have charter counties have that.
Yep. Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Telford.
Larry Telford, question for county staff. If we were to move forward with recommending 3 consecutive 4-year terms for the county council, doesn't that trigger a pension benefit for them? Because I think right now you need 10 years, and if you can only serve 8, of course you don't that means you wouldn't be vested in the county pension plan. Can you at some point just provide us more detailed information of that?
Yeah. Yep.
And following up with that, would we be allowed to amend the charter to say that if we were to move forward with a 3-year term, the council members would be exempt from the county's defined benefit plan and would have to participate in the county's defined contribution plan? Would there be any legal hassles with that or not?
There's a number of opinions on whether the pension benefit is compensation. And if it's compensation, then it's an issue of timing. Because you can't affect compensation during the current term, that sort of thing. So I can pull that, take a look at it. As a little historical background, at one point the county had a separate elected officials pension plan that had different vesting rules because of the notion that you only get so many years.
Was this in the late 1980s or so?
I'm just going to say I came to the county in 2000, and I think it still existed. And then it got rolled into the employees plan. It either still existed or it went away shortly before I came here, but I'm thinking it still existed. But in any event, it got rolled into the employees plan. And then the vesting rules have changed, obviously, a couple times in that 20 years. It was 5 years when I started. For the employees plan, it became 10. There was at one point it was 8, and then because that covers people who serve 2 terms, and then it became 10. So there have been some, but I'll look at the ability to affect the pension. It's a long way of saying that it's probably a salary standard commission issue.
Okay.
It's also an issue of timing, but I'll take a look at that as well.
Okay. My real question is, could we, if we move forward with a 3-term limit, could we limit their pension options to make it, because they always have the option of the defined contribution plan, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we do now have the the defined contribution plan under certain circumstances available to certain employees. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. All right. Any other items any commission members would like to suggest at this point in time? And obviously at the next meeting, as I said, I'm hoping that this will be kind of like our round robin discussion at the end of each meeting. So if there are additional things that we think we need for future discussions, we can kind of get those out there on the table now so staff can plan for them.
So to clarify for the next meeting, because I have to look back at my thing here, will probably be the first 5-ish, the ones that we cross some of those off the list, right? Cross
yes
3, 4, and 5 off. So it'll be 1 and 2, and then Article 2 and Article 3, 13 and 14, which are the emergency legislation ones. I just want to kind of put in going to need for the next time.
Right.
So.
Yes, because items 13 and 14 also apply to the council authorities and responsibilities and things. Yep.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That's
all right.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. And for that meeting, then, I mean, we really don't, do we need anyone from any of the agencies or the county executive's office? Or is that just legal staff?
That's what I'm looking at the questions again to see. I just think it's all legal.
I think it is too.
Yeah.
It's all section or article, basically Article 2 and Article 3 issues.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So all of us have our homework. We need to read Article 2 and 3 if we haven't done so yet. So we're well versed.
And the green book, read the notes in
the green book. Okay.
Yeah. And it's the second half of the green book. The first half is the charter itself. The second half is kind of where they explain why it looks like it looks.
Yep.
There, some of those sections have been changed. Some you kind of have to figure that out, that some of the sections have been changed in the past 50 years. So.
Yep.
Notes are very
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful to kind of see where everybody was coming from.
Okay, sounds good. All right, anything for other business? Oh, Tom took off his mute. He's getting ready to make a motion to adjourn, aren't you? I can see it. I can see it working on it.
No, I was actually chiming in on something else and I was muted, so you all were spared my comments.
Okay. Okay, if there's nothing else for other business, I guess then yes, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So
I'm
moved.
not making it now.
Okay. Okay, awesome. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye, or raise your
Aye.
hand. All right,
I
guys.
abstain.
Wow. Okay, we will leave you on here now. All right, so I guess our next meeting is Valentine's Day. So we can all come wearing red and I don't know, have a glass of wine or something to toast each other. So anyway, all right, guys. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Everybody have
Have
a
a
great
great
night.
night.
Thanks.
See everybody
Take care.
later.
Good night, guys.
Bye.